And so the design is really great. This idea of the circle, this kind of grid with the chromed steel. But I always say, I mean, it's perfect for me. It's really a masterpiece of American streamline. But if you look at the back, what's the real radio? It's just applied, it's just screwed to this beautiful object. So there is this contrast. So the object is not really perfectly solved for me. Anyway, it's a beautiful object if you look at it from the front.
So I had a little, I was much more intrigued when I looked around the back and I saw like this baby coffin in the back, which was, I thought, incredibly interesting. Because literally there's a child's coffin that the radio sits in. So if you had this in your living room, you would essentially have this coffin-like shape for what is otherwise a square radio. It just so happens that they carved it all off like a coffin so that they could make the sight lines, I believe, a little less obvious. So you would be in so you could see it in fewer places. I think this is interesting because of the way it's supposed to be, for a couple of reasons. I mean, one of the things, that circle and the Bauhaus and this idea of going back to this Enlightenment notion of truth and perfection, like when you're searching for this stuff, like where do you go? I mean, we went to the Platonic shape. So the Bauhaus went to these circular knobs, these squares, perfect squares. And so you see in here, every knob is perfectly circular, the dial is perfectly circular. These chrome, there's a very kind of a parallel registration between the chrome. I mean, the formal kind of qualities are interesting. But the real thing, besides the baby coffin, that's so interesting for me is the fact that this is a mirror, and that it's really, if you were sitting, which none of you are, and of course we don't do in the Wolfsonian because there's never been a seat in front of this radio, because it's never been about how the radio performs. But if you're sitting, you basically be looking at yourself, listening to the radio. It's a very unusual, so the performative qualities of this I think are fascinating. And so you're sitting with a group, you're listening to something on the radio, and you're watching the radio sound come out of the mirror of your own image. So again, it's kind of you imposing yourself on the technology in a very similar way to what we were thinking about, I think, with the scale, when you're imposing yourself onto the technology of the scale. The other kind of interesting thing, so this brings up, of course, for all of you psychology fans, brings up the mirror stage in Lacanian psychology, which, as many of you know, was developed right the same year. It was expressed a year after this was built and produced, but it was basically contemporaneous with this radio. So the idea of this is from an architect's point of view. Remember, everything factual comes from Silvia. So the idea of Lacan's mirror stage is that it's the moment in which a child, a baby, sees a complete whole and starts to understand themselves in the context of another. And that's precisely what the radio is doing. It's presenting you in the privacy of your lobby, if it's a hotel that you're staying at, because we're often in public places, or your home, if it's a wealthy home. It's presenting you with the voice of the community with which you need to communicate, with which you're a part. The language is presumably something that you're speaking and you're understanding. The stories were very impactful on people in the 30s, what they heard and how it's in some ways the only way that people got information, not only about the world around them, but about who they were. And so I think this idea of this moment in time when this radio comes out as radio as mirror is like one of the most poignant moments in design history, because it really kind of pulls together that same moment in time in the history of kind of how Lacan was rethinking some of Freud's theories, but really how we look at ourselves as being those people in there who are telling us the stories. And so it makes you kind of question where your place in society is, what the society, who is it? Are you really the voice that's big? What's your role in changing the stories that come out of here? So that is my take on this, which is why I thought it was interesting.